So let's talk about one of the most dramatic, most ironic turning points in all of English history. It's the incredible story of a massive, hard-fought victory that, believe it or not, led directly to a kingdom's ultimate doom. It's a crazy question, right? But for one English king back in the year 1066, this wasn't just some what-if scenario. It was his brutal reality. His single greatest moment on the battlefield would literally pave the way for his own death and the conquest of his entire nation.
So picture this. The year is 1066. England is a kingdom in total chaos. The throne is empty, and some of the most powerful men in Europe are willing to spill an ocean of blood to claim it. This old manuscript here, it really shows you just how much the memory of this brutal, chaotic war was seared into people's minds for centuries. So what kicked this whole thing off? Well, it all started when the king died without leaving an heir. This created a huge power vacuum, and three incredibly ambitious men saw their chance to grab the ultimate prize.
And this is the heart of our story, the succession crisis of 1066. When King Edward the Confessor died without a son, the question of who would rule England wasn't going to be settled by some dusty law book. Oh no, it was going to be settled by armies. And here are our main players. First up, in England, you've got Harold Godwinson. He's the powerful Earl of Wessex, and he was actually elected king by a council of English nobles. He is the local favorite. Then, coming from Norway, you have the fearsome Viking king Harald Hardrada. And finally, across the English Channel in Normandy, there's Duke William, who swore the old king had promised the throne to him. 3 men, 1 crown. You just know this is not going to end peacefully. And the first move came from the north. Harald Hardrada, a guy they called the last great Viking, put together a massive invasion force and set sail for England. He was planning on taking the kingdom by storm. And let me tell you, the scale of this invasion was just staggering. We're talking over 300 ships, carrying maybe 9,000 warriors. And to make things even worse for King Harold, the Vikings' key ally was his own brother, Tostig, who'd been exiled. Talk about family drama. They landed, smashed a local English army, and took the huge city of York. The Viking threat was very, very real. But King Harold Godwinson's response to this, it was nothing short of breathtaking. What he did next became the stuff of military legend. Now, this is the crucial part. Harold was all the way down in the south of England. He was actually expecting an invasion from that other guy, William of Normandy. So when he got the news that the Vikings had landed way up north, he had to make a choice. And he chose speed, lightning speed. He and his army had to cover 185 miles. They marched all the way from London up to Yorkshire. That is an absolutely grueling distance for an army on foot. And they did it in just 4 days. Think about that. That's an average of over 45 miles a day on foot. This insane forced march guaranteed one thing. The Vikings would have absolutely no idea they were coming. Surprise was Harold's ultimate weapon. The two armies finally crashed into each other at a place called Stamford Bridge. And what happened next was a wild mix of total surprise, legendary defiance, and just shocking brutality. So the story goes that before the real fighting started, King Harold himself rode out toward the Viking lines. He offered his traitor brother Tostig his lands back if he'd switch sides. But for the Viking King Harada, he had a very different offer. All he would give him was, and I quote, 6 feet of ground or as much more as he needs as he is taller than most men. Basically a grave. The lines were drawn. There was going to be a fight. The English attack was a complete and total shock. The Norwegians were totally caught off guard, just relaxing and enjoying their recent victory. A lot of them had even left their chainmail armor back at the ships, figuring it was going to be an easy day. They were completely unprepared for the hell that was about to be unleashed. But the English attack suddenly ground to a halt at a narrow wooden bridge. And it's here, according to the legends, that one of the most incredible last stands in all of history took place. This story is just wild. The Viking ferocity was basically personified by one man. A single giant axeman stood alone on that bridge and held off Harold's entire army. He supposedly cut down more than 40 English soldiers all by himself. They only defeated him when one clever English soldier floated under the bridge in a tub and speared him up through the floorboards. Just an unbelievable story of pure grit. So once they were finally across that bridge, Harold's army just slammed into the main Viking shield wall. The battle raged for hours, but without their armor, the Norwegians were at a huge disadvantage. Their king, Harald Hardrada, was killed by an arrow to the throat. Tostig was killed too. The Viking army finally broke and ran. Harold Godwinson had won. It was a total, crushing victory. But this is where the terrible irony of our story really kicks in. The victory came at a staggering and, as it turns out, a fatal cost. The numbers here tell a really brutal story. The Norwegian army was pretty much annihilated. They might have lost 8,000 men, but the English also suffered terribly, with their own losses estimated around 5,000. So yeah, Harold won, but his army was now exhausted and critically weakened. And to really understand how decisive this victory was, just look at the ships. The Vikings invaded with a fleet of over 300. They only needed 24 to take the survivors home. The last great Viking invasion of England was over, for good. The slaughter was so immense that people who wrote about it later claimed that 50 years after the battle, you could still recognize the field by the sheer volume of bleached human bones that were still scattered across the ground. What a haunting image of just how high the cost of this battle was. And this timeline, this reveals the whole cruel twist of fate. On September 25th, Harold wins his amazing victory. Great, right? Well, just 3 days later, William the Conqueror lands his Norman army on the south coast. Harold had to turn his battered, exhausted army around and force-march them another 200 miles. And on October 14th, less than 3 weeks after his greatest triumph, his weakened English army was defeated at the Battle of Hastings, and King Harold himself was killed. The victory at Stamford Bridge had left him too weak to win the battle that truly mattered. And that leaves us with this final thought. If Harald Hardrada had never launched his invasion, if the English army had been at full strength, well-rested, and waiting in the south, would William the Conqueror have ever succeeded? It's a question history can never answer, of course, but it really makes you think about how a single battle, way up in the north of England, tragically sealed the fate of a king and his entire kingdom.